What if I told you that the FBI, the very agency that spent years denying the existence of key evidence, has been sitting on a classified trove of Jeffrey Epstein files so explosive it could shatter the credibility of half the institutions in Washington? And what if I told you that just hours before this episode was recorded, a whistleblower cracked open that vault? And what they found wasn't just damning, it's devastating. The hard drive recovered doesn't merely implicate powerful individuals. It threatens to blow the lid off an entire system built on blackmail, deception, and the betrayal of the American people. This isn't speculation. It's not a theory. It's not a wait and see. This is real. It's happening. And today, you're going to hear the story they never wanted told. It begins with a phone call, a folder, and one man who refused to stay silent. It was one of those Manhattan nights when the wind cuts like shredded paper, cold, calculated, and meant to erase everything in its path. Kash Patel stood just inside the side entrance of the FBI's New York field office. No badge, no escort, just a name and a purpose. Across from him stood Dan Bongino, not in uniform, but with the unmistakable look of a man who's read too many classified documents and slept far too little. He leaned against a steel filing cabinet, like even standing upright in this building might get him audited. Kash broke the silence. "I didn't come here for another deep state bedtime story, Dan. If you dragged me out here on a whistle and a whisper, I'll walk right back out the way I came." Dan straightened up. His voice was low, sharp, carved from the kind of fatigue you only earn after watching your own agency lie under oath. "I didn't call you here because I think there's a problem, Kash. I called you because I know there is, and I can't live with it anymore. You're gonna have to be a hell of a lot more specific than that." "I found a drive," Dan said, eyes fixed and unblinking. "Unmarked, no chain of custody, no digital registration, just a tag, JE 2090s, non-priority transfer, filed under miscellaneous import seizures." Kash blinked. Once. "Epstein? Epstein? And where exactly was it?" Dan paused. "Behind a false panel in Evidence Storage D, Sub-Level 3. You don't even get access to that floor unless your clearance badge comes with a redacted autobiography." Kash crossed his arms. "I was told, repeatedly, that everything related to Epstein had been transferred to DOJ custody under bar, that there was nothing left in this building." Dan let out a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah, that's what they told all of us, until I ran a cross-check by accident." He hesitated. "You ever hear of insurance files that don't show up in your own evidence tracking system?" Kash said nothing. "They didn't want anyone to find this. They buried it beneath the floorboards, hidden under layers of fake paperwork and decades of bureaucratic rot." Kash narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly is on this drive?" Dan didn't blink. "You're not going to like it. Try me." Dan took a slow breath. "Full flight logs, including international departures that were never publicly reported. Scans of Epstein's handwritten guest books. Surveillance stills from his properties. Dozens of pages of personal notes, some in Epstein's own handwriting." "And the content?" Kash asked. "I've only skimmed it," Dan said. "I haven't been sleeping much lately. But I'll tell you this. There are initials in there that no one, not even the press, has dared to print. Not because they couldn't verify them, but because they knew it would set DC on fire." Kash's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Give me a name." Dan looked him in the eye. "WJC." Kash closed his eyes for a beat. "William Jefferson Clinton." Dan nodded. 26 entries, same girl shows up 3 times, same island, and video tags scrawled in the margins. Silence. "I can't sit on this anymore," Dan said, quieter now. "I took an oath. You did too." Kash stepped forward, now just inches from him. "And what exactly do you think happens when I open this case, Dan? Because I'll tell you what doesn't happen. The press doesn't suddenly grow a conscience. The Bureau doesn't confess. And half the institutions in this town will start wiping metadata faster than you can say national security." Dan didn't flinch. "Then let them burn. But I'm done being part of the lie." Kash took the drive from Dan's hand, feeling the cold weight of it. Plastic, aluminum, and 2 decades of corruption. This wasn't just misfiled. It was filed to disappear. Dan raised an eyebrow. You think that's bad? There are handwritten memos in that box, referencing meetings. Private. No logs, no clearances. And the attendees? Representatives from multiple intelligence agencies. This wasn't just a trafficking ring. It was a network, a machine built for leverage. They didn't cover it up to protect Jeffrey Epstein. They did it to protect themselves. Kash clenched the drive in his fist. So now we've got the spark. Dan didn't hesitate. Now all you need is a match. Kash stared at him. I've got Pam. Dan let out a long, knowing breath. Then we might actually see the system flinch. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Kash turned to leave, clutching the drive like a declaration of war. As he stepped through the exit, Dan called after him. You start pulling this thread, Kash. Just know, they'll try to hang you with it. Kash didn't look back. They better bring a damn strong rope. There's a moment in every investigation when it stops being about the evidence and starts being about the cover-up. That moment came the second Kash Patel walked out of that Manhattan vault, holding a drive that was never meant to be found. From that point on, the clock was ticking. Not just for the names listed in Epstein's files, but for the people who helped hide them. And in Washington, D.C., Attorney General Pam Bondi was already 2 steps ahead. She'd been requesting full disclosure of Epstein-related materials for months, again and again. Each time, the FBI handed her the same pre-packaged excuse. You already have everything. But now, she knew better. Because Kash had just walked into her office carrying a 2-terabyte wrecking ball, proof that the Bureau hadn't just missed a few boxes. They'd buried an entire shadow archive. And when that drive hit her desk, something else did too. Pam Bondi's patience? It ended. It wasn't even 8 a.m. when her office lit up like a war room. The evidence, black, cold, and silent, was still sitting right there on her desk. The drive Kash Patel had delivered just hours ago. On screen, the contents of the drive unfolded. Unindexed folders, image files labeled only with hash IDs, scan-stitched logs that didn't follow any standard format. Nothing routine, everything explosive. Pam stood with one hand resting on the back of her chair, eyes locked on the rotating FBI seal watermark dancing across a PDF titled Obsolete Entry, Non-Priority. She turned to Kash, who was silently sorting page scans on a second monitor. So this is what they gave me, she said, calm but with an edge sharp enough to cut steel. They handed me a stack of blacked-out flight logs, public names, and boilerplate garbage. Meanwhile this, she nodded toward the drive, was locked in a basement like it was a nuclear launch code. Kash didn't blink. They never planned to comply. This wasn't an oversight. This was the structure. Pam's voice shifted, clinical and precise. And you're certain the chain of custody is intact? Verified, Kash said. Internal log shows the last handler was an agent from the New York field office. Timestamp, November 17, 2020. After that, nothing. No entry, no transfer. It just disappeared from the system. Pam folded her arms. So what I received last quarter, those 200 pages with names redacted into oblivion, wasn't just incomplete. It was fraudulent compliance. She walked to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a fresh DOJ memorandum template. You're writing? Kash asked. I'm documenting, she said, already typing. Because when I go after an agency this powerful, I don't just hit them, I corner them. Paper first, subpoena second. Her voice was steady as her fingers flew across the keyboard. This memo documents an intentional failure by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to comply with repeated lawful requests from the Office of the Attorney General. New evidence recovered as of 7:42 a.m. Eastern Standard Time confirms the existence of substantial Epstein-related materials that were deliberately concealed from DOJ inventory procedures and withheld during request fulfillment. She continued, methodical, controlled, lethal. Kash crossed his arms. You really think they'll cooperate now? Pam didn't look up. They won't, but I'm not writing this for them. I'm writing it for the record, for the Judiciary Committee, for the press, for when it gets ugly. She paused, sat back, and read over what she had written. The individuals responsible for obstruction, concealment, or deliberate noncompliance shall be identified through an internal DOJ-led investigation, with findings submitted to the Office of the Attorney General within 14 calendar days. She hit print. The memo slid out of the tray, warm and humming with consequence. She signed it in ink, then looked up at Kash. I need a courier. He raised a brow. You want this walked over? Not emailed? Exactly. Because when you send smoke signals like this, you want them to smell the fire coming. She handed him the envelope. You still have that badge access to Hoover? I do, good. Deliver it yourself. I want it landing on Ray's desk before lunch. Kash took the envelope but paused. You sure you want to go nuclear this early? Pam looked him dead in the eye. This isn't nuclear. This is notice. They just don't know what's coming yet. There's a rule in Washington if you want to kill a story. You bury it in a PDF, black out the names, and leak it to a journalist with a mortgage. The FBI. It wasn't the kind of interview they expected from a sitting attorney general. The stage was clinical neutral backdrop, a flag, a logo, one coffee mug. But Pam Bondi wasn't there to sip tea. She was there to drop the names the media had been dancing around for a decade. The host leaned in, smiling, hopeful, nervous, Attorney General Bond. Thank you for joining us. We understand you've recently obtained new files related to the Epstein case. Pam didn't blink. Not new, just previously hidden. The host shifted. Hidden by whom? Pam's tone didn't change. By people who understood exactly what was in them. There was a pause, and then she dropped it, like an indictment on live TV. The Epstein client list is sitting on my desk as we speak. The air left the room. I've reviewed it personally, she continued, and I can confirm these are not social acquaintances. These are not contacts. These are individuals identified by Mr. Epstein in his own notes, who were present, frequent, and relevant. The host fumbled. Relevant in what way? Pam stared straight ahead. Relevant in ways that would make a grand jury sit up straighter. The screen cut to split view. Alina Habba was brought in via satellite. Calm, smirking. A defense attorney who looked more like she was prosecuting history. The content in that binder, she said, is going to send people to prison. And I mean real people. Not some disposable assistant or nameless pilot. The names in here, they belong on plaques and libraries and presidential libraries until now. The host blinked. You're saying there are political names? Alina didn't hesitate. I'm saying there's a reason the left spent 6 years talking about a P-tape while this binder was collecting dust under the FBI's floorboards. And just like that, the circus tent ripped open. Within hours, the New York Post had a leak. DOJ to release Epstein client files, flight logs, name former president. The article wasn't subtle. It didn't have to be. It was Clinton. Bill Clinton. Not a one-time visitor. Not a mistaken identity. 26 entries. Same aircraft, same girl. For a media ecosystem trained to ignore Epstein's connections to power, like a Vegas casino ignores sunlight, this was a disaster. Social media erupted. Hashtags flared. Epstein Flight Club. 26 times Bill. But with every retweet came a growing irritation. This isn't new, people started posting. These logs were public back in 2010. Where's the rest of it? Where's the footage? Why are the pages still blacked out? And that was the trap. Because the disappointment, as one New York Post source called it, was exactly the point. The FBI didn't just bury the truth. They gave the public just enough to feel cheated, just enough to make Clinton trend, but not enough to make him testify. Pam Bondi knew it. And so as she walked off the set that day, she didn't shake hands. She didn't smile for cameras. She turned to her press aide and said, "They wanted a distraction. We gave them a deadline instead. Tried that. They redacted, deflected, and filed Epstein's secrets under miscellaneous import seizures. But Pam Bondi wasn't just filing paperwork. She was building pressure, pound by legal pound, until even the steel doors at Hoover started to sweat. By the time her internal memo reached the Bureau's 7th floor, the tremor had already rippled outward. And if Washington hates anything more than subpoenas, it's silence that turns into a headline. The media had caught wind, but Pam didn't wait for them to twist it. She went first. In Washington, when the press starts circling, there are only two kinds of people: those who disappear and those who overreact. Bill Clinton had spent most of his political life mastering the art of distraction. He could dodge scandals like raindrops, spin perjury into charisma, and make entire newsrooms look the other way with a saxophone solo on late-night TV. But this wasn't the 90s anymore, and the names on Epstein's flight logs weren't fading. They were trending. Again, for the 26th time. And this time it wasn't some intern behind the curtain. It was a leather-bound binder, a DOJ seal, and a woman named Pam who didn't blink. So Clinton did what cornered men always do. He called it a conspiracy. The Clinton Foundation's press room hadn't been used for anything serious in over a decade. It usually housed interns' coffees, and the kind of nonprofit messaging that sounded like it was generated by a PR bot trained on guilt and Harvard handshakes. But today, every seat was filled. There were two flags, a hastily thrown-up backdrop with the word justice spelled wrong on one corner, and a former president pacing like the cameras were heat-seeking missiles. Bill Clinton stepped up to the podium, looked directly at the press, and began, "Let me be perfectly clear. I was never involved in any criminal wrongdoing with Jeffrey Epstein. This is a coordinated political attack, a witch hunt." He paused, waiting for a reaction, a sympathetic flashbulb. Something, nothing. "I flew for diplomatic work, for humanitarian causes. I don't run travel manifests, and I certainly don't run smear campaigns." The room was dead silent. A dozen reporters were refreshing Twitter under the table. Then he made the mistake. This is no different than what they did in the 90s. Find a name, find a rumor, and turn it into firewood. The only thing missing is a blue dress. He chuckled. No one else did, because on the live stream, tens of thousands of viewers weren't watching a man defend himself. They were watching a relic unravel. And just then, Alex Rosen, a young independent journalist with a camera phone and zero chill, stood up from the third row. No press badge, no PR relationship, just teeth and conviction. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't wait his turn. He barked it. "Where are the tapes, Mr. President?" Every head turned, Clinton's included. Security moved instantly. "Where are the tapes?" Clinton leaned back, shaken for the first time, as two aides motioned to security to remove Rosen. He was dragged out mid-sentence, still shouting, "The girls were underage. The logs don't lie. Why were you there 26 times?" The cameras were still rolling. They tried to cut the feed, but it was too late. The moment was already clipped, captioned, uploaded, and shared like wildfire. "Where are the tapes?" Trended within an hour. Not just on X, on YouTube, on Rumble, on TikTok. Clinton's camp issued a follow-up statement within minutes, blaming agitators, right-wing media distortions, and out-of-context heckling. But it didn't matter, because in that moment, he looked guilty. Not just legally, but optically. And in 25, optics hit harder than subpoenas. At DOJ headquarters, Pam Bondi watched the clip in silence. Kash Patel walked in mid-video. "She's viral," he said, referring to Rosen. They tried to bury the moment. Didn't work. Pam didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply said, "Good. Let the people demand what the courts have denied." A pause. Then she added, Let's give them the tapes. There's a difference between denying a scandal and daring it to escalate. Bill Clinton didn't just deny. He scoffed. He mocked. He turned a federal investigation into a punchline about the 90s and address. But what he didn't realize was this. When you laugh at a binder with your name in it 26 times, the binder laughs last. His meltdown wasn't a defense. It was an invitation. The viral clip of Alex Rosen wasn't just a moment of chaos. It was a subpoena in slow motion. Because once the public starts asking, "Where are the tapes?" the government has only two options: release or retreat. Pam Bondi had no intention of retreating. And with Kash Patel standing beside her, they were ready to do what no one else had dared in 2 decades of cover-ups: bring Bill Clinton into the room and press play. Today, the air in the Rayburn House office building felt like it had passed through a shredder before it reached your lungs, thin, stale, and laced with something dangerous anticipation. It wasn't just the cameras lining the halls, or the press badges stacked outside the chamber like a red carpet of reputational suicide. It was the knowledge that for once the system had failed to contain the leak, and the leak had teeth. The headlines had done their part. Binder, bombshell. DOJ confirms new Epstein files. Bill Clinton listed 26 times, House committee demands response. Viral showdown erupts after Clinton heckled by independent journalists. But the real headline today wasn't in ink. It was in person. Behind 2 oak-paneled doors sat the one thing no former president wants to see: a public hearing with his name at the top and no teleprompter in sight. Inside, the temperature had been lowered to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Deliberate, not for comfort, but to keep the cameras cool. The last thing the committee wanted was another lens melting mid-chaos. At the center of the room was a single table. On the left, Pam Bondi, Attorney General of the United States. Calm, unflinching, flanked by a closed leather briefcase, a yellow legal pad, and a nameplate that barely needed to be there. To her right, Kash Patel, Director of Intelligence. Hands folded neatly in front of him, face unreadable, like a man trained to deliver truths that get people killed or promoted, sometimes both. And across from them, alone, no counsel, sat William Jefferson Clinton, hair thinner, voice lower, but ego very much intact. He adjusted the mic with the caution of a man who'd done this before, and badly. The chairman cleared his throat. A procedural statement was read, mostly for the cameras, not for the room. No one listened. Not really, because everyone knew this wasn't about decorum. It was about a list, a name, a number, 26 times, and a question that refused to die. What was the former president of the United States doing on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet? 24 times. Passenger manifest? Pam sat still while the statement droned on, but inside she was counting beats. Each second was another step closer to the moment she'd waited for, the moment the binder would open, and no one, not even a Clinton, could slam it shut. The chairman gestured calmly. "Attorney General Bondi, Director Patel, you may proceed." Pam didn't reach for her notes. She didn't need to. She leaned forward, microphone static, catching the sharp inhale before her words. "Mr. Chairman, members of Congress, Mr. Clinton." She paused just long enough for the name to land. What the American people are witnessing today is not the start of a scandal. It is the end of a cover-up. One that began long before this administration. One that metastasized under leadership that chose to suppress rather than surrender the truth. I'm referring specifically to the Federal Bureau of Investigation under the previous administration, which, when lawfully ordered to produce all Epstein-related files, responded not once, not twice, but 4 separate times that we were in possession of the complete record. She opened the briefcase beside her with a soft click. Inside, one hard drive, wrapped in a chain of custody seal dated only days ago. This drive contains over 2,000 pages of unindexed material, none of which were disclosed in prior responses. Not one entry logged, not one line scanned. Every inch of this evidence was concealed in a sub-level vault in the New York field office, encoded as a miscellaneous import seizure. She let the phrase hang in the air, like poison. Kash leaned in now, measured, voice low but cutting. Let me be precise. That label, miscellaneous import seizure, wasn't a filing error. It was a firewall. It was designed to bury Epstein's logs behind custom seizures so routine they never triggered oversight. He glanced directly at Clinton, then back to the room. That's not an accident. That's intelligence, intentional misdirection, and it didn't happen on its own. Under the direction of FBI officials serving during the Biden administration, these materials were declared non-existent. But we now know they were not only in FBI custody, but also actively maintained and redacted in a manner designed to evade congressional review. Pam picked up again without missing a beat. This isn't just a failure of transparency. It's an act of obstruction. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 1505, it meets every threshold for interference in a federal investigation. And, Mr. Chairman, I want the record to reflect. This committee did not stumble upon this information by chance. We did not receive a whistleblower email. We did not receive voluntary compliance. She pointed to the binder. We found it, we extracted it, and we forced the Bureau's hand. Kash nodded. And the only reason we're sitting here today looking across the table at a man whose name appears 26 times in these documents is because we didn't believe the phrase, "We've already sent everything." He let that line sink. Because we've heard that line before, from Benghazi to Crossfire Hurricane to Hunter Biden's laptop. And every time it meant one thing, there's more. Pam finished the salvo, voice calm but devastating. So today the question is not whether names appear in the log. The question is, why did the Bureau, under the last administration, spend 2 years making sure those names were never seen? The room fell silent as Pam Bondi opened the binder. No theatrics, no dramatic pause, just method. She flipped to the first page, then tapped the display control on the table. The screen behind her came to life. President William J. Clinton, she said, enunciating each syllable, appears 26 times in the Epstein flight logs between the years 2001 and 2003. A chart populated on screen, dates, flight numbers, departure, and arrival points. Clinton's name was highlighted in yellow. The number 26 blinked in the top right corner. Pam didn't look at him. She looked at the committee. The destinations include Little Saint, James, Teterboro, Santa Fe, and on 3 occasions, unlogged private airstrips in the Bahamas, all confirmed by flight manifest signatures in Epstein's own logs. Clinton raised a hand. I'd like to respond, Pam gestured. Of course. Clinton straightened his tie. The voice that once charmed heads of state now carried the edge of a man sharpening excuses. These logs don't prove anything. I've said before, I flew for humanitarian purposes. For Clinton Foundation work, I was there with Secret Service on scheduled trips. These flights were not unusual. Kash Patel leaned in. Sir, you were on Epstein's jet alone. Secret Service logs show no accompaniment on 14 of the 26 flights. Additionally, 3 of the destinations were not on any official itinerary. Clinton didn't flinch. He pivoted. Your cherry-picking details, these logs, are partial. I've never been to Epstein's Island, never witnessed, never participated in any wrongdoing. You're taking a private citizen's travel history and turning it into a headline. Pam didn't blink. We're taking a sex trafficker's handwritten records and comparing them to unredacted federal logs, and so far they match, down to the seat number. The room stirred. Clinton shook his head, forcing a half chuckle. You're blowing smoke. You've got a list. Congratulations. What you don't have is evidence. Kash tapped the hard drive beside him. Let's fix that. He plugged it into the committee's secure display. The screen flickered. Then it loaded. 3 videos, dated, time-stamped, and watermarked with FBI retention codes. All 3 of these were recovered from the Epstein estate, Kash said. They were held in FBI custody under the informal internal tag, insurance policy, Epstein's own label. That's not our term. That's his. He highlighted the folder name, IPJE, final cover. Inside were dozens of short surveillance clips, most redacted beyond use. But 3 were verified, digitally authenticated. We're showing them to the committee with sensitive content removed. The first clip rolled. A private tarmac. Epstein stepping off the jet. Behind him, Bill Clinton. Sunglasses, white polo, no entourage. Silence. Second clip. A security hallway. Clinton exiting a room alone. A girl, face blurred, exits 30 seconds later. Dated 2002. Third clip. A dinner setting. Dimly lit. 4 guests. Epstein at the head, Clinton seated to his left. The girl again, identifiable only by posture, wristband. She serves wine. Laughter is audible. Pam turned off the display. Clinton leaned forward, voice lower, harder. Kash didn't respond right away. He reached into a folder and unfolded a scanned note. He read aloud, "If I go down, they go down with me." He held it up. Written in Jeffrey Epstein's handwriting, recovered from the same box as the videos, initialed J.E., dated 1 week before his first arrest. The silence was now total. Pam looked across the room. "Mr. Clinton, we're not asking you to explain the footage. We're asking why it was hidden for 5 years under a false document tag. Why the FBI, under an administration friendly to your party, buried this entire archive, and why you never disclosed a single one of these trips on your public records." Clinton's voice cracked. I don't recall being on those exact flights," Kash interrupted sharply. "You were on all of them, and we have co-signed manifests to prove it." A rustle went through the press gallery. Then from the Republican side of the committee, Senator Marsha Blackburn leaned into her mic. Cool, unbothered, clinical. "This," she said, tapping the binder, "is one brick in the wall. But rest assured, we're just getting started." The room wasn't silent anymore. It was heavy with a kind of air that settles right before thunder breaks loose. Bill Clinton sat motionless, his tie askew, one hand frozen over a half-empty glass of water he'd stopped reaching for 10 minutes ago. Pam Bondi didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply stood, adjusted the mic, and spoke in a tone that didn't need volume to dominate the room. This committee has heard enough today to confirm what many suspected, but few dared to say out loud. That the system didn't fail. It collaborated. That the silence around Epstein wasn't due to lack of evidence. It was due to its abundance and the political inconvenience that came with it. She turned to Clinton directly. "Mr. Clinton, you are not on trial today. But make no mistake, this is not immunity. This is exposure. And exposure has a tendency to accelerate justice." Kash Patel stood now as well, adding weight, not repetition. "The materials you saw today, video, logs, notes, were hidden by deliberate administrative action, tagged under unrelated classifications, shelved with the intent to never be recovered. That doesn't happen unless someone in power gives that order." He looked across the chamber. "So we are putting the FBI under formal inquiry, not just for failure to comply, but for obstruction of justice. And we expect every former senior official who touched this file between 2020 and 2024 to appear before this body under oath." Pam continued, "This isn't political theater. This is forensic accountability. And we don't care whose name is in the binder or how many degrees hang on their walls. If you took the flights, you will face the facts." She placed her hand on the binder once more, this time not as a prop, but as a symbol. "The Department of Justice will initiate a second-phase investigation starting this week. Every remaining name in this archive, redacted or otherwise, will be reviewed, cross-referenced, and, where warranted, summoned. We are no longer operating under the assumption that any institution is too respected to question. Not the media, not the non-profits, not the Bureau." She turned to Clinton, her voice sharper now. "You had the chance to tell the truth for decades. And every time you chose spin over substance, that choice ends today because starting now, you no longer control the questions." The camera panned to Clinton. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. No one interrupted the silence because no one had to. Kash leaned into the mic for the final time. What Epstein built was a network. What the last administration protected was a firewall. And what we are dismantling brick by brick is the myth of elite untouchability. No more excuses, no more loopholes, no more middle seats on the Lolita Express, the chairman finally said. Spoke, voice almost hoarse. "This hearing is adjourned." As the gavel hit the block, reporters surged. Flashbulbs exploded, but no one looked away from the man in the middle, the one who, for the first time in his life, had nothing left to say. The Epstein hearing didn't just expose a man, it exposed a machine. A machine of silence built by bureaucrats, insulated by press rooms, and maintained by a quiet agreement. Don't ask, don't dig, don't name names. But today, that machine stalled. Pam Bondi and Kash Patel didn't just unveil a binder, they unveiled a blueprint of how power protects itself. Redactions, mislabels, missing drives. Not because the evidence wasn't there, but because it was too dangerous to admit. And in that danger lies the lesson. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied, but it always comes with a higher price. Bill Clinton walked out of that chamber in silence. But the sound that followed wasn't applause. It was the click of a door closing. Closing behind decades of excuses. The next phase will be uglier. More names, more resistance, more pressure from institutions that thought they were untouchable. But for the first time in years, Americans saw something rare in D.C. Accountability didn't flinch. And that means the wall is cracking brick by brick.